Following the recent 14-day truce between the United States and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, global markets rallied. Investors interpreted the pause as the first step toward a return to normal commercial transit. But the political narrative diverges from the physical data. On the right side of the screen, you can see record-high Brent physical spreads and war risk insurance premiums that remain sticky despite the diplomatic pause. Analysts often frame these events as crises, temporary disruptions that eventually return to a known equilibrium. This framing is comfortable because it implies that the diplomatic and economic tools used in the past will work again. However, the divergence between headlined calm and physical market stress suggests a different possibility. We are seeing the visible symptoms of a maritime order that is transitioning into a state we have not yet named. Modern supply chain planning and capital allocation models rely on a single baseline assumption that maritime choke points remain open as a default condition. If the current standoff is a structural break, that prior equilibrium is no longer available. The question isn't when the Strait of Hormuz reopens, but what replaces the system in which it was assumed to be open. Navigating this shift requires examining the compounding shock of the Hormuz-Bab el-Mandeb link and the breakdown of unilateral naval coercion. For organizations relying on historical crisis management tools, the result is a dangerous level of logistical and capital exposure. The shift toward a structural break accelerated during 21 hours of direct negotiations in Islamabad. It was the highest-level bilateral contact between the U.S. and Iran in nearly half a century. The negotiations collapsed over a single U.S. demand, a binding commitment from Tehran to refrain from seeking a nuclear weapon. The Iranian delegation countered that Washington had not earned its trust. Both sides exhausted the available deal space, leaving the room without a procedural framework for future talks. Iran's nuclear doctrine has transitioned toward deterrence by capability. In this environment, a bilateral no-weapon pledge is politically and strategically impossible for the Iranian leadership to endorse. While the talks were still underway, the Iranian parliament was already preparing a vote to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The failure in Islamabad removes the primary diplomatic barrier to weapons-grade enrichment. For regional planners, nuclear proliferation has shifted from a tail risk to a core planning assumption. As negotiations stalled, the U.S. dispatched guided missile destroyers into the Strait of Hormuz to begin mine-clearing operations, a move Iran viewed as deliberate contempt for the diplomatic process. Following the collapse, Washington inverted its maritime posture. Instead of defending freedom of navigation, the U.S. declared a unilateral blockade, threatening to interdict any vessel that complied with Iranian tolling demands. This policy conflates punishment with de-escalation. For commercial actors, a militarized choke point is an uninsurable one, regardless of which navy is enforcing the restrictions. The move lacked international legitimacy. Russia and China used their vetoes to block U.S. authority to define access to the strait, creating a formal fracture at the highest level of maritime governance.
Most significantly, the United Kingdom publicly declined to participate in the blockade. This refusal by a primary ally signals a breakdown in the consensus required for collective maritime security. When the dominant power relies on unilateral coercion that its own allies cannot endorse, the alliance architecture fragments. Future collective action becomes transactional and uncertain. The geography of the region prevents the containment of the crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is systemically linked to the Bab el-Mandeb, the second great maritime artery connecting the Middle East to global trade lanes. Coercion in the Gulf naturally migrates into the Red Sea. Pressure in one artery incentivizes regional actors to widen the theater, turning a localized energy dispute into a systemic shock to global trade. The situation in Hormuz is further complicated by technical failure. Reports indicate Iran has lost track of the mines it planted, making it physically impossible for Tehran to guarantee safe passage, even if a new deal were struck. As a result, the Cape of Good Hope is becoming a primary corridor for Asia-Europe trade. This is no longer a temporary detour, but a reorganization of freight architecture, projected to last 18 to 36 months. This detour adds 10 to 14 days to transit times. Within a rolling 60 to 90-day cycle, the shortage of shipping capacity will manifest as a shortage of consumer goods in Western markets. The double choke point shock ensures that a regional geopolitical contest directly engineers structural inflationary pressure in the global economy. The current 14-day truce is a verification window, not a settlement. It is a period for both sides to assess compliance and reload their coercive instruments for the next phase of the conflict. To navigate this environment, leaders need an operational matrix that separates headline noise from systemic signals. Instead of following official statements, monitor localized surges in AIS dark activity near choke points. When shipowners begin to price conflict rather than commerce, the strategic narrative of an open street loses credibility. Watch the financial transmission. When Gulf sovereign risk premiums widen while physical oil markets remain tight, the system is signaling a breakdown that has not yet reached the evening news. Fragile ceasefires fail through the silent correlation of these physical and financial systems long before the first missile of a new escalation is launched. The Islamabad collapse, the paradox of the blockade, and the double choke point contagion are not isolated events. They are the visible surface of a transition in the maritime order. Supply chain planning must now strip the assumption of open choke points from its baseline models. Access to these corridors is no longer a default condition, it is a contested one. Maintaining reversible hedges and alternative routing is a requirement, not an option. A temporary dip in oil prices does not constitute operational normalization. The most dangerous strategic error is assuming the environment in which we make tactical decisions has remained constant. Waiting for a structural break to be officially confirmed is equivalent to waiting until the decision space has already collapsed. Recognizing this transition is the first step in preparing for a maritime environment that we will have to learn.